Welcome back to From My Living Room to Yours. Over these past 11 months of the pandemic, I've been thinking a lot about grief and how we're not only feeling the collective grief of the many losses in jobs, lives, identity that we've all experienced or people we know have experienced. Then I heard something this weekend in two different forms, two different sources that started me thinking about how is it that we transform that grief. The first form was a seminar I participated in locally via Zoom. Mental health providers talked about the different levels of stress in our lives. And one professional reminded us of that study that gives numeric scores depending on the intensity of the stress to the stressors in our lives. For instance, getting a divorce is worth 75 points of stress, and the death of a spouse is 100 points. That psychologist also reminded us that some things that we think of as joyful events, like getting married, are actually stressful and come with a level of 50 points worth of stress. What's easy to forget is that each change in our lives serves as a stressor, and that during this pandemic we are experiencing compounded stressors. That each change, whether it's the loss of identity because we don't go to an office building for our work anymore, whether it's the stress of our kids not being able to go to school, or our family not going on our traditional vacation each summer, all of those are actually stressors, and they can count from 20 to 40 points in our lives. Using that framework, it's easier to see how all this stress is compounded. And in many cases, it involves grief. And we are all carrying that with us on a daily basis. The primary point of the seminar was that until we name our grief and the level of stress we're under, we can't do anything about it. So the first thing is acknowledging the truth of what's going on in our bodies. The Psalms, along with the Book of Lamentations, provide great models for us. The psalmist, or the lamenter, thrashes about, shouting out to God the depth and breadth of their agony and their despair, knowing that God is big enough to contain all of this for us. Then we remember that God is on the journey with us. And after we've acknowledged the stressors and the grief, then we can move towards transforming that grief. Now, it might be too soon for some of us to start to think about transformation of grief, but the second source of my insight this weekend was listening to an interview with a singer-songwriter. She talked about having lost a loved one in the past year and how, of course, devastating that was, but that she really wishes that people in her life would have talked with her about what experiencing someone's death is like and how actually moving through the transformative, or I should say, moving through the grief could actually become transformative. So she said as she began to write songs about her experience, she realized her relationship with her deceased loved one was being transformed. Her grief was transforming in a healthy way. Jesus models this process for us as well. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but the words Jesus wept are so simple and yet so profound. Jesus stood at the house of his dear friend Lazarus, and he wept. He wept because he loved Lazarus, and he had been told that Lazarus was dead. Before Jesus could transform anything, he had to weep. He had to be present to what was true, and then he brought about amazing transformation. So, in this next week, be gentle with yourselves. Acknowledge that we are all experiencing a huge amount of stress and grief. And remember that the only way we can start to move through that is to acknowledge it and then to believe in the hope that there is the possibility of transformation on the other side. So until next time, friends, be humble, be grateful, be kind, and remember that God is with us.